is HPA's test prep specialist, and he does all things test prep, including hosting our MCAT prep sessions, figuring out our mock exams, and also hosting our Zoom drop-ins. So if you do have questions about, preparing for the MCAT, or maybe you're already preparing and now you have questions like, how did they get this answer in this practice question? Doug is the person for our UC Davis students and alumni with us today. Just a real quick announcement before we jump in for boot camp. I did send an email this morning with the 2 registration links for the upcoming in-person events. So tomorrow's Snack with a Physician is going to be with a cardiologist. He practices in the Bay Area, and he's really excited to host an in-person event to meet with you all. Snacks will be provided by HPA. And then next Monday, we're hosting Ready, Set, Suture and learning how to finance your medical school education. The U.S. Army will be joining us, and they'll be not only talking about and showing how to suture, but also talking more about their health professions scholarship program, which covers the cost for tuition. And they also provide a stipend, and they also provide a signing bonus. They do have some additional requirements, and they'll talk more about the process on Monday. But I'm going to put the link in the chat for those registration forms below. Again, these are in person. We are planning to at least also broadcast the Army session over Zoom as well. But space is limited, so highly encourage registering as soon as possible. With that, if you do have any boot camp questions, feel free to DM me. I'll be hanging around for a little bit. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over the reins to Doug.
All righty. Thank you, Karen. So how's everyone doing? Well, you already answered that question. So I'm taking it that there's some pretty good feeling people out there, because I saw a fantastic. I don't normally see that one. But thank you for having me for Pre-Med Boot Camp. I'm going to be talking to you guys about, well, today some introductory pieces about the MCAT, and then tomorrow we'll take a little bit of a walk through some of the strategies you can start to apply when actually taking your MCAT. So today, just to get a feel for where everybody's at, how many people are planning on taking the MCAT within the next, well, before September? Just give me a me in the chat box or something like that. Right, so looks like nobody planning on taking it within the next few months. Okay, how many people are planning on taking it by September next year, so within next year? Okay, we got more of those people. I saw a maybe in there. I think it's always a maybe when we're talking about the MCAT, because you should never take it until you're ready. And then how about those taking it within the next 2 years? It looks like that gets the rest of us. So it seems mostly next year or two for the MCAT. I'm going to bet there's a few out there that are freshmen, meaning they're probably planning on taking it within the next 3 years or so. Has anybody here taken a practice MCAT at this point? Looks like one. Took a mock exam, 2. We will talk about that actually today. So one of the first things I would always suggest for anybody who's getting to understand the MCAT a little bit better is to take a practice test. And there's lots of free practice tests out there. We'll indicate where some of them are today. But that's the first thing I'm usually going to ask you when you come to see me of like, okay, I want to start putting together my MCAT study plan. I'm probably going to say, have you taken a practice test yet? So that's always a good question to answer, because it tells me a lot of things. It tells you a lot of things. Most notably that you understand what you're up against, because the test is not a simple test, that you have started that process, that you started looking into the process a little more seriously. And so, yeah, that's a good first step for anybody who's starting to get prepped up for the MCAT. So just a little bit about myself, so you guys have more feel on that. I come to HVA by way of a long, strange trip. I started out as a chemist working for the United States government, working for a Department of Energy site up in Hanford, Washington. Didn't quite like that, so I started teaching university chemistries. Yes, I used to teach organic chemistry. I'm sorry, not sorry, because not everybody teaches chemistry, organic chemistry, the same this way. I hope to think that I like to think that I did a pretty good job with it. Have some people walking away still today saying, wow, I wish I had an OChem teacher like you. And then, so at some point I moved on from that. Actually, that some point was 2008 in Colorado, where the economy tanked. So I ended up going to Texas, where I started working as a test prep developer and test prep teacher and blah, 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 blah. I did a lot of test prep across the board for all those tests, SAT, ACT, with the Princeton Review. And then I started my own business, and then Joanne Snap here brought me on board back in 2019, just before the pandemic, just in time to spend 2 years off campus. But we're back. I'm in my office. Woohoo! So that's been my long, strange trip to get here. But along the way, I've been doing test prep for the better part of like 10 to 15 years, because I did test prep while I was at the university as well. That being said, I never look at test prep like it's a one-size-fits-all thing. Everybody has their own needs, so that's the way I kind of go about it. So with the MCAT today, what we're planning on talking about is, well, first we're going to talk about how to register for it and what are some things to think about when it comes to registering for it, because unfortunately, registering for the MCAT is a bit of a tedious process. We'll look at the structure of the test, how the test is scored, and what scores you might be targeting when you're taking your test, what's on the test, what are the prerequisites you need for it, some of the prep resources that are available out there, and a little bit about prepping itself. So we're going to go the gamut of all the way across the MCAT. So let's start with registering for the MCAT. The tricky part about registering the MCAT is that it's only offered in certain times of the year, and you can only register for it twice a year at this point. I mean, you can register outside of that, but the way that they do their registration usually means that when opening day opens, so for example, for all the test dates from January through May, they're gonna come open in November of this year. They have not yet released the calendar for next year, but that's usually what they do. And within a couple hours, most of the sites that you're going to be wanting to take your test at will probably be gone. And it's just the nature of the beast. There's a lot of people that need to take the MCAT, and there's just not a lot of place to take it. So you might have to start looking in places like North Dakota and South Dakota. I'm not kidding. I've had students take the test in Oklahoma. I've actually had one student once, which is probably my favorite version of this. They couldn't find a test in California, so they decided to make it a holiday, and they took a test on a Saturday in Hawaii and then spent another week there. So that's always something you could do, is make it a holiday to take the MCAT. Yeah, you can do that. But not saying that that's the only way to do it. You could actually register outside of that time, like after November. But what you're doing is you're usually waiting for a spot to open at a location. So as things get closer to the real test dates, people tend to get afraid and they might delay. So you might consider, well, you probably want to get one under your belt, and then you can always look at moving it down the road as long as test positions become open. The only time of the year you can't actually do that is for later in the year's tests. So like August, September's test, there's no way to kick that can down the road. You got to take it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to delay it until the following year, because they keep the registrations within one calendar year. I would encourage everybody to apply for the fee assistance program. They've been giving away more fee assistance awards in the last year than they've ever had. They've opened it up to more people that can get it. Definitely get the fee assistance program going, because you can see what it does to the registration fee. Like, it's $130 versus $325 for the full test. I would anticipate the standard registration fee going up another $5 this year to $330. It's gone up $5 a year for like the last 4 years. So I would guess that the price is going to go up a little bit more. Notice this one thing about applying for accommodations. I can't stress this enough. If you need accommodations for your MCAT, and that's fine. I see all these messages out there on places like Reddit and Student Doctor Network, which, by the way, stop going those places. They're incredibly toxic, and they tell you very bad information. For example, simply having accommodations is not going to make anybody look at your application and go like, oh, they needed accommodations for their MCAT? All right, we're not even going to consider them. So, yeah, don't do that to yourself. If you need accommodations to level the playing field, get accommodations to level the playing field. Now, I have to say it's going to take 2 to 3 months to get accommodations awarded, and you need to have your accommodations in place before you register, because not all testing centers can support all accommodations, so it might limit the locations to where you could register for your exams. That being said, there's 2 viable ways to be prepared to apply for accommodations. One of them, you went to a public high school where you had accommodations. Your public high school should be able to provide for you an individualized education plan, an IEP. You may have heard of it before, maybe you haven't. But if you had accommodations in high school or in a public high school, then you almost certainly have an IEP, which is good qualification to get accommodations for the MCAT. The IEP has on it, by the way, your diagnoses. You were probably tested in grade school or middle school for a learning disability, and then so that basically you've gone through the work of getting diagnosed and getting the appropriate accommodations. If you don't have that, then I see a lot of people try this. They go to Davis and they start getting accommodations at Davis or something like that, or they went to a private school. The paperwork that those schools, like either a university or a high school that's a private high school, is probably not sufficient, because they do not do testing for learning disabilities. So you would certainly need to go to an educational psychologist at that time to get a diagnosis, and they would have to write up basically a prescription for accommodations. You only have to apply for accommodations once per year, basically. Like once it's in, you'll probably get it the next year if you have to retake. But you only need to do it if you're going to retake the test within the same calendar year. So either get a diagnosis from an educational psychologist, or with an individual education plan that you had from public schools. Some private schools might have what you need, but it's less regular for that to happen. What are examples of accommodations? The weirdest one, and the one I would suggest all you left-handers deal with, is the fact that a left-handed mouse is an accommodation and you would have to actually apply for it. So you're probably all used to this at this point of using a right-handed mouse. So there you go. But generally speaking, accommodations are going to be extra time, time and a quarter, time and a half. I've seen people try to get double time. That is not going to happen, because if you get double time, that means you're going to take your test 4 days. It's going to take 4 days to take your test. I don't know. I've never seen the MCAT try to do a 4-day administration. As it is, if you get time and a quarter or time and a half, that's now an administration spread out over 2 days, which is why certain testing centers can't accommodate for this. Other accommodations is stoppage time, where like if you have difficulty focusing, so you might be able to get an extra 30 minutes where you can stop the timer wherever you want, and you get a total of 30 minutes that you can use for that. There's also screen readers, or you might have a test reader if you have visual problems. Like there's some sensitivity issues that they could get you a piece of yellow cellophane to put over the screen. There's a lot of different ways that accommodations come up for whatever learning disabilities you might actually have. When you apply for the fee registration program, can we apply now if you're planning on taking the exam next year? I would wait until, for fee assistance, the fee assistance program lasts for 2 calendar years, but I would wait until you're a lot closer to your registration date for your MCAT to apply, so that when you actually do your application, you still have access to the fee assistance program. So The fee assistance program can be both for the MCAT and for the sending of your application to medical schools. So don't do that until just before your test date. That would be my suggestion there. So with this in mind, you got to be thinking about test date, like, you know, a good 6 months or more in advance, because if you have accommodations, especially, you need to plan for that. So when can you take the MCAT? So the MCAT is only offered in January and then March through September. There are no dates ever in November, October, November, December. That's not going to change. And it's unlikely that there's going to be dates in February. This is what it's been for like the last 5 or 6 years. I do not anticipate this changing. This is not the schedule for the next year. This is the schedule for the current year. And you can see how they're sort of scattered throughout. So like, during the spring, you don't see a lot of test dates. You just see them right in January. So a lot of people prep for January tests. A lot of people prep for May, June tests. And a lot of people prep for August, September tests. Those tend to be the high points of when people are prepping for exams. So plan backwards from your test date when you choose the date, location, and time, and then give yourself an additional 3 to 6 or more, depends on what situation you're in, time for studying. So that's how you start planning out your score or your application date for your, that's how you plan out your MCAT date based on your application date. Also look at the score release. The scores are released pretty much 30 days after you take the test, pretty religiously. Often get a lot of questions of like, if I take a June MCAT and they don't get my score until July, is that a problem? Will that delay me because it's rolling emissions? Da, 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 da. Really, that's not that big of a problem. It only starts to become a problem when your test scores start coming back in late August into September. Then you're starting to delay things pretty substantially. That can cause you some issues. But honestly, it's, you know, if you need to retake, it's never too late to retake within the year. Within the cycle, I should say. You can do rescheduling within the same year, as we said, but there is fees to do it. There's 60-day, 30-day, and 10-day restructuring, and you can cancel or reschedule the test. It's the cheapest, of course, the furthest out. So you can get some of your money back or only spend a little bit of your money to reschedule your test. Or cancel your test. Within 10 days, you're taking that test. You either take it or it shows up as a no-show, which is basically no score. So it'll count towards your number of attempts if you don't show, but it won't count. It won't show anything as far as your test score is concerned. If you're planning to take the test in September 2023, do you need to register in November of 2022? No. The second test registration time is usually in February. For the latter half of the year. So if you're taking something in the latter part of September of 2023, say, you're probably going to be registering closer to February of 2023. So if you're going to plan on taking the beginning of next year, November is your important date, and then February for the latter part of the year. Along those lines, I will say I know a lot of people don't use Twitter much anymore because it's just a lot of bad news, but it's well worth having Twitter on your phone for AMC purposes, because AMC makes pretty much all of their major announcements on Twitter first. The Twitter feed that they use is this one, or the MCAT, at AMC-MCAT. They'll tell you about when things are coming, like test dates and stuff like that, or the fact that we might actually see standard or practice test number 5 from AMC this year. Knock on wood. I hope that happens. I'm not going to guarantee it, but there was some large implications at a conference we were just at about test 5 coming. So follow them on Twitter. It's an important site for their announcements. There are testing limits. Now, I know nobody here wants to take the MCAT more than once, really, but you can retake it. That's perfectly fine. And honestly, there's not a lot of bad thing that can happen to you from retaking it, unless, say, you have a 510 and you retake it and you get a 498. That's probably going to reflect poorly on you because they're going to look at you and go like, why did you retake and get such a lower score? But if you retake and get slightly lower or you get higher, nobody's going to question that you did a retake. But I'd say try to take it once if you can at all avoid it. But you can't take it 3 times in 1 calendar year. You can take it 4 times in 2 calendar years. You can take it no more than 7 times in your lifetime. Although if you had to go past that, which I hope you don't, you can always petition to get another opportunity to take the MCAT. And then you may only be registered for 1 test at a time. So you cannot register for a new test until after your test date is complete. So you could walk out of the test on, say, taking it September 10th, and then you could immediately register for whatever next one you wanted to. Well, not in September. That was a bad example. On July 7th or something like that, and you could, on July 8th, start registering your test that occurs within the next part of the cycle. So what does this test look like? Ooh, this is a beefy test. Add it all up, you're spending about 7.5 hours taking this test. Whew, so stamina. Stamina is an important thing for this exam. And that's not it. You're told to arrive 30 minutes before your test. And I do encourage you all to arrive 30 minutes before your test because you really want to be that first person in line because you don't want to sit there waiting until like 8:30 or 9 o'clock to start your test. Because the test started at 8 a.m., but this is first person in line, first person in, first person to start their test. As they check you in, each person checking in is going to take a little bit longer. The last person starting the test can be as late as almost 9 o'clock, just depending on how big the testing center is. So be the first person in line so you can just walk in, start it, and get done with it. But wait, there's more. Because you're probably going to live around 30 minutes or more away from your testing center. And that would be adding another 30 minutes to your day because you're going to have to drive there. But wait, there's even more because you're going to have to get up and you're going to have to be, well fed and awake and showered or whatever you're going to have to do. Your morning ablutions is going to have to do that. So really, you're all in. You're probably talking over 12, almost 12 hours, over 11 hours, probably almost to 12 hours of your day is going to be spent dealing with the MCAT, which also says if you're going to be taking practice tests, when do you need to be getting up? If you're going to mimic the real environment, what do you guys think? What's a good wake up time to be taking a test that starts at 8 a.m. with all these other rigmaroles that you got to go through? And I'm going to leave that question for Karen. Would we be able to get access to these slides? I don't know what she's doing with that, so I will leave that in her capable hands. So what time of the day you got to be getting up to take an 8 a.m. MCAT? Oh, you definitely should sleep. You need to sleep. Depending on the person, honestly, I would say 6 a.m. 6 a.m. is reasonable. 7-ish, probably not. Because 7 is only leaving you 30 minutes to do your whole morning routine and get to the testing center by 7:30. That's probably not going to be enough time. Because like I said, you're going to have to count for traffic and getting there. Most of you do not live within half an hour of your testing centers. If you're in Davis, there is no testing center in Davis. The nearest testing center is on the far other side it's either in Fairfield or it's on the far other side up near Roseville-ish. Or the south side of SAC, like on US 50, you're like 30 minutes away. So these are all things that go into planning. Like when you're practicing, you should model that, make it the same kind of thing. So, oh man. And so that should not be the first time, by the way, that you're getting up at 6 a.m. or 6:30 or whatever it is, because then you're going to be really groggy because of that. So there's a lot of reasons to get used to having a long day. Yeah, do not sleep. That would be not my advice there. You definitely want to get good sleep. You want to work on transitioning your sleep schedule as you're getting ready for the MCAT to be going to bed 10 o'clock if you want to get a full 8 hours of sleep. Some things to note about the schedule. Each of the science sections is 95 minutes long and I have 10 passages, which means you need to be doing about 8 minutes a passage. So what do you think of reading passages when you have 8 minutes to read passage and answer 4 to 5 questions? Should reading take the most of your time or should answering the questions take most of your time? Answering questions should take most of your time. You do not get points for reading. You get points for getting questions right. So you got to learn how to balance how much you're reading and how quickly you're reading versus how much time you learn to spend on the questions. You do not get points for reading. You get points for answering questions. That's the long and short of a standardized test. Looking at the cars section, you get 10 minutes of passage, 9 passages, 90 minutes, 10 minutes of passage. Now we're talking passage that has 6 to 7 questions. What I see a lot of people do is they spend like 5 to 6 minutes reading the passage. Well, that's way too long. Again, you got to balance reading with answering questions. Because if you're spending like 5 to 6 minutes on the reading, you now gave yourself 4 to 5 minutes to answer 6 or 7 questions, which is less than a minute a question. So you're taking away precious time from answering questions by doing all that reading. So a lot of getting good at the MCAT is learning how to read quickly and accurately without reading every single word. And I need to take just a moment here. Give me one. Sorry about that. So this won't be the first time I say it. This will not be the last time I say this. Or this will be the first time, not the last time I say this. This test is a science test, or this test is a reading comprehension test. Which one? Science or reading comprehension? This is a reading comprehension test that has science questions on it. It is not a science test. And I need everybody to understand that now, because the more you understand this before going into the test and going to prepping for the test, the less time you'll waste by just focusing on content. You do not get better at the MCAT by learning science. You get better at the MCAT by reading, because half the time, more than half the time, even in the science passages, what you need to answer a question is not in your head. It is in the passage. It is given in a table. It is given in a paragraph. It's given in an experimental description or something like that. So you need to use your ability to read to get better at this test. You got to develop your reading comprehension strategies. And the strategies for approaching the actual test similar or to or very different from the ACT, SAT. I'm going to say similar to, but a lot of the strategies are not directly applicable. But the idea of process elimination, doing plugging in on math, doing like targeted reading on the passages instead of trying to read every single word, like those things are very similar. But when it comes to the types of questions, the questions are pretty unique and very predictable on the MCAT. And there are different kinds of questions than what the ACT, SAT did. So as far as approach to the reading comprehension side of things and the approach to just general approach to questions of process elimination, I would say they do match what you probably learned about the ACT, SAT very well. The style of test is very different. Is the MCAT similar in a sense that if you get a question wrong, it doesn't lower your score? Oh, are you saying there's no guessing penalty? I think that's what you're asking. Yeah, there is no guessing penalty. So it lowers your score if you get a question wrong, yes, but it doesn't make your score even lower. So they're not going to take away points for not getting a question right. So yes, you should answer every single question, whether or not you know the answer to said question. So always put an answer for every single question on this test. That is important. You'll notice also that there's 2 optional breaks, take them, and there's a mid-exam break, that's your lunch, take them. You need to work on this ahead of time as well as like what snack you're going to have. You know, don't bring a big old like sushi board or whatever and expect to stay conscious for the next half of the test. Like all the carbs from the rice, you're going to right in the middle of the test. Or if even worse, rice absorbs water. So if you drink a lot of water and you have all that rice, I've seen people just in the middle of tests before because they ate a lot of starchy foods and it doesn't go well together with the test. We don't want that to happen. So you got to plan out your snacks. You got to plan out when you're going to do things and how you're going to do things and stress, dealing with your stress. The one thing that I think everybody gets tempted by is the void question right at the end of the test. Just before you finish, it's like this big red shiny button, kind of like what Groot was dealing with in Guardian of the Galaxies 2, because he wanted to press the shiny red button. All y'all are going to want to press that void button, because most of you will walk out of that test feeling like you just got the crap beat out of you. And you're not going to feel very positive about how things are going. So trust me when I say there's only a couple good reasons. It's not your opinion of how things went is not one of those reasons to void. 2 reasons. You get extraordinarily ill during the test, like very, very sick. You're probably not in your right mind, probably a good idea to void your test. That means it's not scored. It does count towards your total attempts. Or if there's something weird that happens at the testing center, for example, power goes out for 3 hours. They will make you sit there for 3 hours waiting for the power to go back on, but you're not allowed to talk to people and you're not allowed to go on your phone. I don't know about you, but how many people here can go 3 hours without their phone without getting really stressed out? Right? We've become addicted to these things anymore. You can't touch that thing. They won't let you because you got to sit there and just wait and wait and wait and wait, however long it takes. The power goes out for 10 minutes, no big deal. That's not a huge disruption. But if it's for a significant period of time, or say there's a weather thing, like the AC breaks down, or they lose access to the internet, or whatever it is, if that goes on for a substantial period of time, you're tanked for the rest of the test. Sometimes you even have to redo questions you've already answered if things didn't sync up ahead of time. So that's the only other reason I've seen a good reason to void tests, because the AAMC will not consider that a bad testing day. It has to be something like over 5 hours delay for them to consider that a bad testing day. So if it's like 3 hours, that's just all part and parcel for the day. The AAMC will not give you a refund. They will not consider it a mistested opportunity. As far as snacks go, by the way, get off the non-prescribed medications, caffeine pills, Adderalls, all that stuff, if you're at all using that, because it's not going to help you on this thing. It's just going to make you all kinds of a mess. Coffee, not the best stimulant and stuff. Like Red Bulls, get off the Red Bulls weeks before, not a couple days before, weeks before. Change your habits. Because it's going to make you a better test taker to be clean from all that stuff. Ideal lunch, honestly, it depends on the person, but pretty much whatever you want to have, whatever you need in there is going to have to be complex carbs and protein. So probably one of the simplest things would be Gorp. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It used to be what we took on camping trips and stuff. Good old raisins and peanuts. I know peanuts aren't for everybody because of allergies and whatnot, but something with high protein and high complex carbs, or something like fructose even. It gives you a nice kick, but it's not going to put you to sleep. Like eating a lot of bread, sandwiches, no. Sandwiches are bad. There's a lot of simple carbs in there just going to go right to your brain and put you to sleep. So you got to practice. Find out what works best for you. Milk for an example is one that doesn't work well for a lot of people. The fats kind of give you the brain fog. A lot of fatty foods, brain fog badly. All right. How is this wonderful monster of a test scored? Every section is going to give you a score of 118 to 132, which seems incredibly bizarre until you actually understand why they did it. It's a 15-point scale. It's just centered on 125. The old MCAT before 2015 was scored on a 15-point scale as well for the sections. And the reason they had to change it was because if they had just stuck to the 15-point scale, the total possible score on the new test would be 60. The total possible score on the test from a bunch of years ago was 45. So those scores were way too similar to each other, and it's impossible to tell which version they came from. So they just kept the 15-point scale, shifted everything up to 125, which means the overall score is somewhere between 472 and 528, with the middle of that range being at 500. Now, it used to be 500 was the median. But as you can see, where's the median now about? Has it drifted upwards or drifted downwards? drifted upwards a bit to around 502. It's close to 502 is the median. So this happens with all standardized tests. I would say if you haven't experienced this before, here's your first exposure to it. Once people start figuring out the test, the average scores, the median scores tend to rise upwards. And we've seen that also with these scores for applicants and matriculants. It's no big surprise. Thankfully, it's been a slow increase up to only about 502, which is great because that means it's still about the same as it was. This is a scaled test. It is not a curved test, which means on any given day, are you compared to other people taking the test that day? Absolutely not. It does not matter when you take the MCAT. There's again, Reddit has a lot of just BS on it. I've seen people try to swear up and down, it's best to take the test in September because that's when the dumb people take the test. First off, no, that's not when the dumb people take the test because anybody taking the MCAT is not dumb. They're definitely pre-meds and they're definitely, smart people. The other thing is, it doesn't matter. Who cares? It doesn't matter who else is taking the test that same day. It's not going to change your score. You are compared, I'm not going to lie about this, you are compared to people that took the test in past years. In fact, you are being compared to all of the people that took the test. If you take it in 2022, you're being compared to all the people that took the test in 2021, 2020, 2019, 2018, 2017, and 2016, and a handful from 2015. The scale is constructed from historical data, not from who else is taking the test currently. There is no guessing penalty, and there will be questions on there that are not scored. There will be unscored experimental questions. Will they tell you which ones they are? Will they tell you which ones are experimental? No. So it means you need to try your hardest on every single question. Otherwise, you run the risk of missing out on points. Every once in a while, you can probably figure out which one's unscored, but I would still say try. Because every once in a while, they'll give you this question that comes out of complete left field, like, wow, I have never seen anything remotely like this question. And that's probably experimental. Doesn't necessarily have to be, so you can't count on that kind of thing. So what kind of scores do we need? So there's two types of scores to keep in mind. There's DO requirements and there's MD requirements. So let's look at DO first. By the way, I just want to point out that in 2021, the applicant numbers jumped dramatically for med school, but not a huge amount for DO school. It went up by about 3,000 applicants, so that's not a huge difference. The matriculation rate is about the same. But for this past year, 27,277 people applied. They all had about 9 applications each. Again, that stayed about the same. And of those, 8,516 got matriculated, which means they started their program. More people were accepted, but this is the number of people that started the program. So right now there's a 31% matriculation rate for DO schools, which is pretty normal for DO schools, just because of number of positions versus number of applicants. There is a question real quick from what we were talking about previously. To clear up this rumor for score, does the location we take it mean we are compared to people who took it in the same location or everywhere? The location is also 100% irrelevant for the scoring. The scores versus the entire pool of people that have taken the test historically. So it doesn't matter where you're at, doesn't matter who you are taking it with, what time of year or any of that stuff. There's not more acceptances in DO than MD because we want to look at the numbers. The matriculant numbers for MD is 22,666. There's approximately 4 times more people, 3 more times people going to MD school. That's because there's simply more MD schools with bigger class sizes. So as far as numbers go, the reason the MD numbers are so much bigger is because there's just less DO schools and smaller class size. More MD schools, larger class size. But I digress. Let's come back to the DO's numbers for just a minute. The average applicant had a 503, a 3.5 average GPA, and a 3.4 science GPA. The average matriculant was slightly higher to 505 composite MCAT and a 3.635 combo for your GPAs. So these are averages. These are not the rule, which means there's plus or minuses in all of these things. And we, as like in the HPA, I'm the data guy. I also look at like ranges and things like that. We see people from Davis getting into DO schools with everything from like 492s all the way up to 5 somethings into DO schools. To be safe, here's what I suggest you have for your DO school. Get a 500. If you want to go to DO school, a 500 will get you an interview into DO school. That's lower than the average, and that's fine. Yeah, you don't have to have averages to be able to go to these programs. So get a 500 on your MCAT. That's a nice, good, solid starting point for DO schools. With MD schools, the picture's a bit different. This picture is really different because the number of applicants and applications went up massively last year, pandemic, like huge, so that the matriculation rate went from over 40% down to 36%. These numbers are not reliable. You need to look at historical data over time. Normally, med school matriculation is about 42%. It dropped because the applicants went up from like 57,000 to 62,000 people, like an extra 5,000 applicants for not a lot of additional spots. Because every year we gain like 300 more. Another MD schools opens up, we gain about 300 more spots or so. Just depends on the year. That application number is the first time it's ever been over 1 million in a given application cycle. But what's funny is the number of applicants per person didn't change. So really all we saw last year was this massive bump in people applying to MD school, massive, but they're still sending in the same number of applications. That's why the matriculation rate dropped dramatically. I think we might see a little bit of that effect in the 2022 year. I think things are going to be back to a bit more normal by 2023 cycle, where the matriculation rate is probably going to be closer to 42% again. It was just the pandemic. Everybody decided it's time. I'm going to apply to school because what did they not have to take back for the 2021 cycle? The MCATs, because most schools went test optional around that time, at least for a short period of time, things are coming back where schools are saying, yes, you need that MCAT again. Now for applicants, the composite MCAT score is 506. The median MCAT score is about, for the matriculants, the average MCAT score is about 512. Again, averages. My suggestion to be safe, to get interviews at an MD school, shoot for a 508. DO school, 500 will get you interviews. MD school, 508 will get you interviews. And that's not to say a lower score won't get you in. Again, looking at historical data from Davis students, we see people with 498. I think the lowest we've had in recent history has been a 498 got into an MD school. 498. People are like, well, if you don't have 500, you can't go to MD. That's a load of hooey. 498 can get you into med school. It's a lot of other things that go into your application besides MCAT scores. Grades, personal statements, letters of rec, the way you write of your experiences, the experiences you've had, all that stuff is relevant. Do not put stock in those people. Like, I know there's these grids on there online that say, well, if your GPA is this, then you got to get this in your MCAT. I want to just say right now that chart is bull, because those are using aggregate scoring. It does not represent the individual. You are being looked at as an individual at the application stage. So your situation is your situation. So don't be looking at those thinking like, if I GPA is like 5.3, then I'm going to have clearly a problem. That doesn't work that way. You do not need to be afraid of it in that way. Please, please, please understand that. So what's the magic number to make sure, like, to really feel confident for DO school? To really feel confident for MD school? Yeah. And remember, there's a plus or minus in all of this. So if you have a lower score, that does not mean you're not going to one of these schools. And you might retake too. So that's all right. You do not have to be average or above on these scores to go. So keep that in mind. My magic rule is always 500. Yeah, that. 500 and 508 are sort of my magic numbers in the sand for myself. Now, what's on the test? Biochemistry. Some of the big topics in biochemistry that are covered on two of the sections, Chem, Phys, and Biochem, are enzymes, like enzyme inhibition. Remember all that stuff, like competitive, uncompetitive, non-competitive, mixed. All that's going to be on there. Metabolism, so like gluconeogenesis, glycogenolysis, glycolysis, Krebs cycle. Throw the Calvin cycle in the trash can because you do not need it for this test. That is all plant biology. We don't care about that. Central dogma and protein trafficking. General chemistry, I know you all loved that. I would say one of the most important topics in here is going to be, well, the definite hands down most, in my opinion, is acids and bases. Because you're going to see this across organic chemistry, biochemistry, biology, and biochemistry. I think I said one of them twice. General chemistry. So it's a huge topic. Same with kinetics and equilibrium. One of the ones that I should just add to this is intermolecular forces. You will see intermolecular forces come up so much and answer so many questions in this test that you got to know your IMF, like hydrogen bonding, dipole forces, dispersion forces, or the equivalent that you see in biology and biochemistry, hydrogen bonding, ionic bridges, salt bridges, and hydrophobic forces and all that kind of fun stuff. They're the same. It's all the same. They just give them different names. Organic chemistry, nomenclature, isomers, big one. They love to ask about isomers and understand what types of isomers there are out there. Reactions and mechanisms, not so much. Not a big topic on the MCAT anymore. In fact, I'm going to tell you what you don't need to know. Alkene reactions, yes or no? Alkenes? No alkene reactions. Alkynes? No alkyne reactions. Aromatic reactions? You mean all that ortho meta para crap? Yeah, is that on the MCAT? No, it's not there at all. It's all gone. All that effort that you put towards that. Diel-Solder? Nope. Cycle additions? Nope. So really, it's going to be SN1, SN2, E1, E2, and it's going to be the reactions of carbonyl compounds. So nucleophilic addition and nucleophilic addition elimination. So about 60 to 70% of all of the mechanisms and reagents that you had to memorize are not covered on the MCAT. You don't have to know that much as far as chemistry goes for the MCAT, organic chemistry. What they do is they make up for it with separations and identification techniques. So things like chromatography and things like electrophoresis and things like ELISA and things like blot methods and think like NMR, IR, that kind of stuff is going to be far more important than the mechanisms are. And if you go to the website for the AMC MCAT page, you'll find that they have the standards list. In fact, there's also this, which I'd encourage everybody to get at some point, which is the official guide to the MCAT that has that information in it. So get the official guide to the MCAT at some point, and that will tell you what is and is not on the MCAT. The trouble with the separation identification technique stuff is that it may be stuff that you never learned, so you're probably going to have to learn it on your own. Physics, forces, work energy. I cannot stress that enough. Most questions in physics come down to work energy in some way, shape, or form. CP is Chem Phys is one of the sections, and BB is Biochem, one of the other sections. Fluid circuits and light sound come up fairly often because biological systems, fluids, circuits, brain, electrical circuits, light, sound, eyeballs, ear. So a lot of things come up with that, but work energy is the big fundamental of a lot of concepts on the MCAT. I grade out kinematics because kinematics has taken a backseat in recent years on the MCAT. It's very difficult to have a question about like projectile motion when you're talking about a human body, like unless there's like supposed projectile vomit involved in it somehow. Kinematics is difficult to work in. So kinematics, they don't ask about nearly as much as they used to. Biology. What's the grayed out thing here that might be very, very surprising? Anatomy. You don't need to know anatomy for the MCAT? No. Taking gross anatomy here at Davis is not useful for the MCAT. Now, I know a lot of people take it because it's a gross anatomy class. It's really cool. But if you think that gross anatomy is going to help you on your MCAT, don't, because you're going to see that come later on. Like, I would take that after you take the MCAT. Leave anatomy if you want to take it off until you take your MCAT. There's no need to have anatomy for the MCAT. Physiology? Oh, yeah. There's a crap ton of physiology on this test. In fact, most of what the section is, the biochem section is, which is BB, is physiology. Then they'll bring a little bit of this into PS, which is Psych-Soc, the last of the science sections. There will be a little bit of biology of the brain, basically, Psych-Soc. So, but physiology is a massive class to help with this test. Genetics, micro, and cell biology are also covered on the section. In the case of genetics, you probably don't need genetics class before you take the test. But I would encourage micro as a good course, not for the science, but for the labs. The lab of micro is so important because it teaches you so many of the techniques you're going to see on the MCAT. So that's also important. And then cell bio, for those people who really struggle with, like, how do the individual systems work within individual cells, that would be very helpful for the MCAT bio stuff. Then we get to psych and soc. Honestly, the psych-soc, you probably don't even need to take Psych 1 or Soc 3. If you did, I would take one or the other. You don't necessarily need to have both of those for the MCAT. Psych-Soc is perception, behavioral, self-identity, pretty much the standards. And then Soc is social, cultural structure, and equality, so getting more into the grander stuff. If I had to split those, it's about 70-30. 70% Psych, 30% Soc. So if you have to make a choice between Soc 3 and Psych 1, I would say that Psych 1 is the more useful class to you on the MCAT. The one that I wish more people would take is Psych 41, which is research methods, not because of the psychology part of it, but because of the research methods part of it. It talks about they talk a lot about the human-based research stuff that's going to come up on the MCAT in certain types of questions. I would say take Psych 41. It'll help. Mathematics on the test, you are expected to do some math, but there's virtually no trig. The rest of it is all basic algebra. So the only trig you're going to have to deal with is cosine and sine of 0, 30, 45, 60, 90. That's it. So everything else is going to be just basic arithmetic. If you're doing more than that, you're doing more than basic algebra arithmetic, you're working it too hard. I will in a moment. I have a slide just for that. I didn't realize there's other non-Davis students here. So I will put those, I have those in a separate side. So thank you for asking. Now, that's all I'm going to say about math, because math is a minor part of this. A lot of people get afraid of the math on the MCAT. You shouldn't. At the most, there's going to be maybe 8 to 10 questions total that involve math, and it's usually conceptual. If this goes up, that goes down. That's the math you have to do on an MCAT. Oh, yeah. CARS is this abbreviation they use called Critical Analysis and Reasoning Skills. This is the fundamental reading comprehension section of the test. It's the second section we saw. And these questions come in 3 flavors. The first of these foundations of comprehension is the first type of question you see in CARS. And these are what I like to call retrieval questions. Retrieval questions. Go back to the passage and find the answer. Students' biggest problem with retrieval questions, something that you can walk into this knowing, is you're reading beyond the scope of the text. You should not be reading between the lines. You should not be reading between the lines. You should be reading what is there, what word choice is there. I actually was just talking to a student this morning about the difference between a and the. Yes, that was an MCAT conversation. Let's have that right now. What does a say? What makes a different than the? A means one of many. The means this one, this specific one. Other way around. The is the specific to one thing. A is the generic one. It's one of many. And the answer choice that was a discussion here was they are each meant to They are each. The statement in the passage started with an A. Abe looked blah, blah, blah. They are each. Do those jive together? A, they. I got a yes and a no. A is talking about one of many. They are is talking about all of them or one of them. All of them. So an A statement cannot be fixed up and used together with a they are. Because A says this one is, the answer is saying they all are. Something as teeny tiny as that is enough to get rid of an answer choice here. Individual word choice. They even say this in their cars. Inferring meanings from rhetorical devices, word choice, and text structure. It's how they're putting things together. It's not making things up from, it's not interpreting it. So the biggest lesson I can say right now, reading comp wise, is don't read beyond what the text actually says. Look at the fundamental word choice that they're using. It really makes a difference. Look at parentheses. Parentheses mean for example. All this stuff really does get us out of the, pulls you, if you're not paying attention to that, you're going to start falling for bad answers. Then there's the reasoning within the text questions. I usually call these the structural questions. These are the main points. These are the main purpose. These are the why did the author say it this way, or what was the evidence, what was the assumptions. It's integrating different components of the text to increase comprehension. It's basically looking at how does everything fit together. It's a lot of the whys. It's a why did the author do it this way. So again, you have to be paying attention to overall structure, paragraph structure. Why did this paragraph come first? Why did this sentence come before that sentence? Reasoning beyond the text, I call these new info questions because they're going to bring in something outside the passage, and you have to figure out what does the author think of that? Or does it weaken or strengthen the author saying? Which means you need to understand the passage at a grand scale now. I need to know what the whole darn thing is about in order to answer these questions. So these are the levels of questions that we have. These retrievals, it's in the text. These structurals, we should understand how the text is put together. And the reasoning beyond the text, where I need to understand what the whole point was. Why did this thing get written? And that's what our job is on the cars. Is it common not to get to every question within the time limit? It's pretty common, but that's not what I would want you doing on the real test. At first, when you start practicing, you're probably not going to get to every question because you're spending too much time doing what? Mentioned this way back when. Yeah, you're probably spending too much time reading, which is the problem. So you have to train yourself to look for these littler things than trying to read every single word and make sense of it. One of the things that I see students do is like, okay, I didn't finish, so I didn't understand, or I wasn't able to get to this. And so what people will often do is double down on the reading. Don't double down on the reading. If your first read through didn't make any sense, is reading it harder going to make it any better? And why not? What are you doing to read harder? Taking even more time. It's going to make the whole problem worse. So by reading it harder, you're just wasting even more time to take away from answering those questions. So it's just a case of you've got to understand that reading is not always, like, reading it in detail is not going to get you there. You got to be looking for the tiny stuff that's going to answer questions. What you're looking for is the stuff that answer questions, not the stuff that makes, like, that's all floofy. And then SIRS. And I don't know why people don't use this acronym as much, but the science sections are all based on these SIRS. They're all based on these SIRS. And this is the scientific inquiry and reasoning skills. So the first kind are the ones that I think everybody thinks they're taking on the MCAT, and that's the memory questions. Demonstrating understanding of scientific concepts, identifying relationships between closely related concepts. This is your memory at work. This is the stuff you're pulling out of your head. Problem is, only about 25% of the questions are this kind of question. So what did I say before? Is this a reading comp test or is this a science test? It's a reading comp test with science questions once in a while. So that's the problem. These memory questions do not amount to everything. So yeah, you might be able to get all of these 25 to 30% questions correct, but then you're missing out on the 45% of scientific reasoning and problem solving. These are the ones that actually are reading comp questions in a passage. You got to go back and understand what they're telling you and getting that fact that they're giving you in the passage and combine that with something you know to answer the questions. Or the 10% of the questions that's reasoning about design and execution of research, which is where a research methods class is going to come to shine. And notice ethical issues in research. Ethics is now a part of the test. It never used to be. A good answer choice on the old MCAT for the question of what's the best way to determine that H. pylori causes ulcers. On the old MCAT with no ethics, the correct answer to that question was infect somebody with it and see if they develop an ulcer. Is that a good answer nowadays with ethics being part of the test? No, you better not be running around infecting people with random bugs and seeing if they cause things. So like I use that as an example because on one of the MCATs before 2015, that was actually an answer that was correct. It was crazy. It was crazy. So now ethics are part of the test, and you have to understand how like sampling issues and representative populations and bias and the null hypothesis and the alternate hypothesis and type 1 and 2 errors and all that stuff is part of this, as I call them, research design experiments or experimental design questions. And then finally, there's another 10% of questions, which is how do I read a table, a figure, or a graph and get information from it? So this accounts for 75-ish% of the sections that are science, which all involve in some way, shape, or form reading comprehension rather than just straight up memory. You got to get the info from the passage. So that's a take-home point, guys. That is really at the heart of the science, is to learn. Just because you know things does not mean you're going to be able to answer questions. You have to pick apart the passage. You have to pick apart the question. You got to look at the wording. You got to look at so many other things besides just knowing science. SIRS just is a shortcut for scientific inquiry and reasoning skills. Scientific inquiry and reasoning skills, where CARS is the critical analysis and reasoning skills. It's the two sets of standards they put together to define the new test. All right, what about the prereqs? So I'll go through and name all of these as we go. So prereqs, all the ones I think you must have before taking the MCAT are in dark bold. So biology, that's a 1 year of general biology. Chemistry, that's 1 year of GChem. Organic, that's 1 year of OChem. Although here at Davis, 1 year of OChem 128, that's Chem Majors OChem. You do not need Chem Majors OChem 118 ABC, or just a regular OChem class will do. But you need 1 year of OChem, and you need 1 year of physics. Those are really fundamental basics. And then statistics, you need 1 quarter or 1 semester of statistics. Doesn't matter what the level of statistics are, you need that. For med school, you also need 1 year of calculus, but you do not need calculus for the MCAT. Then, of course, there's psych and soc, psych 1, soc 3. That's just general psych, general soc. I don't really think anybody needs either one of those technically to be ready for the MCAT, because a lot of times common sense does a great deal of good for that. And also the fact that a lot of it's reading comp as well. So there's that. And then Psych 41 was the class we have here at Davis called research methods. I don't know that there's necessarily an equivalent at other schools. It's just something that's talking about the design of human-based research. That's basically what it is. I don't know about many schools saying they don't actually require calculus. There's quite a few of them. I would default to having calculus. If you don't have calculus under your belt, you're probably not going to be getting into a lot of med schools. You may not need a full year. You might need 1 semester or 2 quarters, but I think you should default to having calculus in your plan. Does Psych 41 at Davis have a prerequisite like Psych 1? I think the prerequisite for Psych 41 is Psych 1, yeah. So research methods prereq is having general psychology first. All right, then biochemistry. For the MCAT, the biochemistry you probably needed was taught to you in general biology, the 1 year of general biology. It's nice to have a brush up, but it's not necessary. That can be done with either a 2 quarter or 1 quarter biochem, although I would probably stick to the 2 quarter just for number of units, personally, when it comes to the application later on. Genetics, again, I don't think genetics is a make or break for the MCAT, but it's something that you can get away without. Probably you want it to have it. Micro, 102, 103L, which now, by the way, for you people at Davis, must now take in different quarters. You can no longer take Mike 102 and 103L in the same quarter. Have to take it in different quarters, much like physiology, MPB 101 and 110C versus MPB 101L. They have to be taken in different quarters. I think those are also really good classes to have under your belt before taking the MCAT. Like, I would put the non-bold ones as it would be nice to have, the bold ones as being you probably have to have it. And then the gray ones there, I really de-emphasize those. That's why I put them in gray. Cell bio, immuno, and human anatomy, not really super necessary for the MCAT. They're not really going to give you any bang for your buck. They're nice classes to take, but they're not going to help you out with your MCAT. Can we take bio and general chem at the same time? There's no reason why not, except for maybe just taking into consideration of how much effort it would be to take those 2 STEM classes at the same time. But at some point, you're going to have to take 2 STEM classes at the same time, hopefully more. Can you take BIS, B, and C in 1 quarter? I do not believe you can. I think you need to take them in separate quarters. But again, that is not my 100% field house. You would probably be asking a academic advisor at that point to make sure that that is or is not a possibility. So my bare minimum for MCAT, for when I feel people should be comfortable taking it, 1 year of bio, 1 year of GChem, 1 year of OChem, 1 year of physics, and a stats class. These other classes, they're great to have, but you can probably get away without it. And then the last 3, cell bio, immuno, and human anatomy, probably don't take them if you think it's going to help in your MCAT. It's probably not. Take them because you wanna. Don't take them for the MCAT. Save those up until after it. There's another question. Can stats be taken into QCC over the summer instead of at Davis to be accepted as valid credit? For med school, yes. However, stats is often used as a major requirement, so you would have to check with your major advisor to make sure that works, your academic advisor. So when it comes to what can transfer in and count for what kinds of things, always default to your academic advisor. They have to tell you whether or not it will transfer in for that specific prereq. And then, but I will say, outside of that, if you needed it just for a prereq for med school, it doesn't matter where you take it. Again, physics prereqs, that's again a bit outside my wheelhouse, but physics classes have any prereqs? Can we take them right away in our first year? I believe you'd have to have at least some calc under your belt for physics. You might have that from high school. I don't know. But again, I'm going to defer physics, like questions like that. That's your academic advisor. We don't deal with much here because that's not helping. That's not going to be something we understand for going into med school. We just know you need physics for med school. We don't deal with prereqs a lot over here. All right, so given the time, I'm not going to get to my last 2 points. I'll start with those tomorrow because I'm going to get into a little bit about prep resources and prep timelines. I will start with that tomorrow because we only have about 5 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is first open up the floor to questions, and I can answer questions for about 5 minutes. Then I have to get on to another presentation. So thank you all for coming, and hopefully you learned a few things about overall MCAT information. And then tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about what prep might look like for you, what you might need to do prep, and then we'll dig into what are some strategies that work well for cars and science alike. So let the questions fly. Ikra, question.
Hi, I had a question. So I tried to make an appointment with you, but I didn't find anything available. But I needed help making a schedule for the MCAT. Do you think it's more helpful if I take a practice exam and then see if there's any available appointments, or do you think drop-in would also work?
Well, I have my drop-ins for just specifically test prep on Mondays 9 to noon. So those are not for any other day except for any other things except for test prep. So getting appointments is really difficult because we're short-staffed, and I'm split between this and HPA and the post-bac program. So I'm hard to get an appointment with, but I'm there for all for drop-ins, and then the test prep drop-in hours. The link to that is at the test prep site that you see the link of at the bottom, hpa.ucdavis.edu/test prep.
I see. Okay, but I needed help making a study schedule for the MCAT. Should I just still try to make an appointment, keep checking? Is that probably the best way, or?
No, take a practice test and come to drop-ins. That's literally the best way, because making appointments, you're going to have a hard time finding an appointment.
Okay.
So come to the drop-ins, and then we can start that process. Especially for that first one, we're probably not going to be there for more than like 10, 15 minutes because there's going to be, I won't make a schedule for you. I will help you make a schedule. Yeah. So got to get you to started on the process. Does HPA have a mock test days? Yes, we're having one on August 20th. Sign-ups begin on August 1st. Keep an eye on the test prep page and you will see that. How does UCD test prep work? Well, we don't really have test prep. I have some sessions that you'll find on the test prep page. I just do those once a week. Right now, it's mostly strategy. If you have more specific questions, come to drop-ins or schedule an appointment. We don't have an official test prep course, no. Do you have information about the next MCAT practice test? So yes, August 20th on campus for our next practice mock exam. Our service for only UC Davis students? If so, do you happen to know any test prep students for? So UC Davis students, yes. Our services here, my services are here for only UC Davis students. If you know any about test prep services non-UC Davis students, then yes, that's actually one of the things I'm going to bring up in the beginning of next session, i.e. the MCAT prep resources that are out there. Students are still in the process of completing their prereqs. Do you have any prep strategies still run? Buying prep books ahead of time and doing anything with the prep books, not super easy. Not super useful, I should say. I don't think it's really like, you know what will help you be ready for the MCAT? Get A's in all your classes and remember the material. Like, don't make sure you're doing as best you can and recalling as much as you can. Like, I know people that get through organic chemistry don't remember a darn thing. That's not a good plan. If you want to make it useful to test prep, just make sure you remember all the stuff that came up. So yeah, that would be the best way to do it. Like, getting into test prep books right now, not a super good plan. Really won't help much. Do the mock test days have a fee registration process? Are they open to any Davis student wanting to? You got to be a Davis student. You have to be able to provide your UC Davis ID. And you just register on our website at you go to ucdavis.edu/testprep, hpa.ucdavis.edu/testprep. Registration for the mock exam begins on August 1st. In terms of test prep books and materials you can buy, again, I will start with that on our next session tomorrow. That's where we're going to get started. Will there be a virtual mock exam? Virtual? Not if I can help it. We're going to be doing stuff in person because that's the way the test is. You cannot take the test or the standardized test at home or the standardized test from home. They never allowed that even during COVID. So all of our mock exams will be in person. The mock exams are using free practice tests that are out there, so you will not get it back to us from us. You'll get it back from them. The MCAT taken on computer. The MCAT is a computer-based test, yes. So we'll be taken on a computer. So our mock exam will be people coming in with their laptops, plugging into the bench, and all that fun stuff. And again, I will be discussing different test prep options at the beginning of next class. Prep classes versus tutoring and all that fun stuff. Oops. Yikes. Where did I go? There we go. Would you recommend students take a practice MCAT if they're still working on pre-RX like physics and stats? I think that's fine as long as you're getting ready to take the MCAT. But if you're still like a couple years away from taking the MCAT, I wouldn't say taking a mock exam at that point is worth it. It's kind of a waste of a test. Not total waste though. You'll still at least find out what the test is like and what you're shooting for when you're studying. Kind of a dumb. There's no such thing as dumb questions. Well, there actually are. The dumb questions though are things like, why is there air? Kind of a dumb question, but are all questions on the MCAT multiple? Yes, all the questions on the MCAT are multiple choice, and that's not dumb at all because plenty of tests have other types of questions. Is there a specific calculator best recommend? None, because you do not get to use a calculator on the MCAT. There are no MCAT calculators. You get a periodic table, and that is all. Everything else is done on scratch boards. That was a lot of questions. Any other questions? I can answer one more. I got one more minute and answer one more question. All right, it looks like you're all questioned out. Oh, wait, one last one. If I take the mock exam in August, can I keep taking them as they're offered in Davis? No, you can take as many as you want. You might end up running into a test that we've already done, but you just get another practice test that we aren't doing that day. Could you repeat what I said about the MCAT test prep study programs? Like, what I said is that I will be starting with that tomorrow. I will be starting talking about prep programs, materials, all that kind of fun stuff about how you make some decisions on that. First, the one thing I can say about it today is that it's a decision that everybody needs to make individually. Is the test prep program going to work for you? I don't know. It depends on where you're at. It depends on how you're doing. Depends on what you need to do. Depends on how much motivation you had. A lot of different things go into that decision. Just taking a prep course is not advisable if you have no reason to take a prep course.